psychopharmacology. She also is a licensed clinical psychologist and nationally certified school psychologist. She is a board member of Peace Psychology and International Psychology, those two divisions within APA, and also focuses on school crisis prevention and also training and intervention. She serves as a board member on the Interfaith Community for Detained Immigrants in Chicago and provides consultation and training for the Young Center for Immigrant Children's Rights. Originally from Ireland, Dr. McGrath collaborates with international colleagues in Indonesia, Greece, and India. So thank you so much for letting me share a little bit about her. And you'll get to hear her in just a minute. So as we get started, we're just going to share kind of a roadmap for today and what this looks like. First, we'll just be going over the learning programs and objectives for this presentation. We'll be sharing evidence-based strategies for supporting youth in mental health. We're going to be looking at a theory particularly called positive youth development and comparing that with other leadership, other developmental theories as well. And then briefly looking at positive psychology approaches and resources for professionals and students. So whether you're students in psychology, students training to become counselors in the counselor education program, or even if you're over in social work or marriage and family therapy, these are general resources that should be beneficial to anyone that will eventually be working with youth. So looking at this today, the presentation will offer, as we mentioned, evidence-based research on interventions from positive psychology and ecological perspectives that focus on resilience and the whole child. The goals for today, the program objectives, are that you'll learn these evidence-based strategies for supporting youth in mental health. You'll learn again about positive youth development, PYD, and compare this approach with traditional developmental theories. Participants will identify opportunities to apply positive psychology approaches in their own work and personal lives. The rationale for the topic, or kind of the background on this, one, before I became a professor, I worked in the school districts, and I also worked in hospitals and agencies in different areas as a licensed professional counselor. And one thing that I've seen over time with youth, but also just doing research on this and learning more about this in the field, is looking at resiliency for youth and, really how much that makes an impact in the trajectory of their lives. And so that the idea behind this was looking at the various factors that influence mental health and wellness of youth. They can include past traumatic events, environmental effects, other determinants. However, there are certain populations that are considered more vulnerable based on their marginalization within society. And if anybody knows about the Chicago School, and especially the clinical mental health counseling program and the counselor education program that puts this conference on, social justice issues and really standing up for groups that are marginalized is really a big theme here at the Chicago School. And we wanted to wrap that into this presentation as well. Also looking at the whole child, the mind, body, spirit, and focusing on two parts was part of this presentation. So not just looking at the pathological models, but really promoting wellness as well. That was part of this presentation. So here we're going to have Dr. McGrath. I'm going to go ahead and play. This will be about 12 minutes of her speaking. She's going to go through her parts of the presentation here. And again, thank you for your patience while we kind of called an audible, since she's in Lebanon right now.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining our session. I'm Breda McGrath. I'm one of the Associate Campus Deans for the online campus, and I'm joining Dr. Mays and Ranafwani today to talk to you about effective strategies for supporting youth mental health. The strategy the approach that I'd really like to share with you today is one called Positive Youth Development, or PYD. The origins of this approach are from the 4-H study of individual and ecological bases of health development among a diverse range of adolescents. And the 4-H stands for head, heart, hands, and health. And really the approach of 4H is learning by doing. This is an approach that's being implemented in mental health programs across the US and worldwide. It's an approach to strength-based focus on mental health with young people, with kids from all the way through school, basically every age. Positive youth development approach is really rooted in Bronfenbrenner's ecological model of looking at the person within the system of the entire ecology within which they live. And it's a bidirectional belief. In other words, it believes that there is a bidirectional impact between individuals and their environments. And that is what causes human development. We impact our environment, and our environment also impacts us. And that's what leads to development. Another component that I'd like to touch on in terms of our considerations of effective strategies for child mental health are the research that's been done about adverse childhood experiences. And these are the kinds of things that we are aware of that children are impacted by throughout their lives. Over 61% of adults have noted that they have been impacted by adverse childhood experiences. Such a huge percentage of the US population is really notable. But the kinds of experiences they have can be impacted positively if we focus on their future development in a positive way. But it's important that we understand not just focusing on the positive, but also accepting the experiences that they've had to date. The definition of an adverse childhood experience is really a potentially traumatic event that occurred during a person's childhood or any time between, we'll say, 0 and 17 years. A traumatic event or potentially traumatic event is something such as violence, an experience of abuse or neglect, witnessing violence in the home or in the community, and also having a family member attempt or die by suicide. The mental health consequences of adverse childhood experiences have been well documented, and these are one of the most important reasons for an approach to mental health that really is suitable for youth, given the high percentage of the population that's experienced these challenges. So the positive youth development approach has 5 and actually 7 now C's that are the cornerstones of the approach. And those 5 C's, the main 5 C's, are competence, and they're defined here for you, confidence, connection, character, caring. And then 2 have been added in the recent years, and they are contribution and creativity. This 5 C's approach is actually being researched across the world. And the reason I put in all 7, but only numbered 5, is because it's the 5 that are being reasonably and reliably researched everywhere. Some places are exploring the 6, and some researchers are examining the 7, but it's the 5 that's sort of the cornerstone. So if you are looking at effective strategies for youth mental health, this is an approach that I think is very helpful. It was introduced by Lerner, and I think if you research or look up references by Lerner, you'll find a lot of different kinds of programs, and you'll find programs across cities in the US and worldwide that are looking for positive programming that they can embed in communities for children and young adolescents. Each of these 5 components particularly are embedded in the goals of the program. And there are a couple of other components that are important to note. This is the framework that's being used by the Youth Development Institute to explain what positive youth development is. Basically, it's an understanding or a belief that young people do everything through relationships or connectedness. A program that's hoping to help them will also need to believe that preparation is essential and that young people strive for mastery naturally if we prepare them for it and provide the proper environment for them to learn. We also need to provide them with opportunities. Young people gain confidence when they're given the opportunities to impact the world around them. And so this is nicely explained by the Youth Development Institute. But these components together lead to thriving youth. So what's the difference between a positive youth development approach and a traditional approach to adolescent development? The main difference is this focus on deficit, what's wrong with children. What I think the positive youth development approach looks at is accepting that there are adverse experiences that children have and traumas that children experience when they're young. However, we do not need to look at them as deficient or pathologized for the rest of their lives. So the traditional mental health model is often what we call a medical model. It's looking for problems. It's focused on psychopathology. In positive youth development, adolescent development specifically is seen as growth. It's not seen as a troubled time. It's seen as a focus on, or the focus at that time is on promoting competence, promoting empowerment, developing resilience, telling young people that they are thriving and showing them how they can do it and giving them opportunities to develop optimally. So rather than focusing on or relying on the risk factors and the behaviors, it's acting in advance and increasing the assets that are available to young people and strengthening their protective factors that makes a difference. So how do you do that? The number one way of doing that is ensuring that within their ecology or ecological systems, children and adolescents have close relationships with adults. That's an essential component of positive youth development. In addition to that, they need to have high expectations, both for themselves and from those adults who are in their lives. It's not just about the adults having high expectations. It's also about the children themselves having high expectations. A program that's focused on positive youth development has engaging activities. Engaging means fun and things that they actually have some decision-making control over. Opportunities for contribution, ways to give back, ways to be involved in their communities, and then a continuity of adult supports over time, not just a quick shot, a summer program, a 6-week idea in the fall. It needs to be a continuity over years. It doesn't matter if it's not the same person all the time, but it needs to be a consistent level of support. So some terminology or some ideas that can help switch your mentality from negative development or deficit development into this positive youth approach is looking at young people in terms of a positive focus, not looking just at problems, looking at youth as resources, looking at proactive behaviors, developing proactive behaviors because you know what they're likely to react to and not waiting for problems to occur. Looking at youth as all youth rather than troubled. Oops, I see we have a typo there. The professional's role is often something that's left to the counselors, the psychologists, the social workers, the teachers. In fact, engaging in positive youth development is seen as everyone's job and not just the job of the professionals. Instead of doing just programs for children, we develop relationships for children. Rather than developing competition among children, we develop cooperation with them. And rather than being, I suppose, despairing when things don't work out, we begin beforehand with hope. There's a lot of very interesting research going on internationally about this approach to child development and adolescent development. And I wanted to just summarize for you a number of cases that are in this book that you'll see on the screen, the Handbook of Positive Youth Development. It's edited by a friend of mine, Radosveta Dimitrova, and her colleague, Nora Weem. These are just a couple of the examples of research that they have in this book that are just extraordinary. They tell the story of different research projects that were carried out using this approach in different countries. Not only do they have an incredible range worldwide of different places and different cultures, they also have different types of methodologies, which is tremendous. So you can see Turkey, Ghana, Brazil, Albania, Norway, Australia. This is just a small sample. There's a huge number of countries where this is being studied, and they have incredible results available. And you can read those for yourself. So what are the core concepts that we're really looking to develop in a program that is built along the lines of positive youth development? What's an effective strategy? Well, one of the first things you do is you ensure that the program is built around developing a child's assets, their strengths. And those assets actually need to be more than just their social assets. They need to be social and emotional, behavioral, cognitive, and in terms of moral competence. So it's really looking at the full child. The environment in which they're learning and socializing and living also needs to be one that enables this strength to develop. They have to have opportunities for positive social involvement. There must be recognition for positive behavior, bonding opportunities, positive norms within that culture. There can be spirituality that has been shown to be really strengthening for a lot of kids if it's specifically relevant to their culture. Resilience, focus on developing positive emotions and in developing life satisfaction. And then the last one here, agency. Agency is helping the child to engage in decision-making and advocate for their own voice. And so in order to have agency, a child needs to develop a concept of self-determination. They need a clear and positive identity, and that's something that develops over time. And they also need a belief in the future, their future specifically. So I'll pass it back over to my colleagues for the next part. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to Dr. McGrath and being able to allow her to do this virtually and recorded. So thank you so much. So one thing I'd like to share a little bit is I want to go back to ACEs that she talked about. So when we look at this, when we look at ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, if you could just go ahead and put in the chat, I'm going to ask you a question. And if you could just, it's a true or false question. So do you believe that adverse childhood experiences can shorten a person's, an individual's lifespan? And all you have to do is just put true or false. I'll just give you a moment to jump in there and put that in the chat. And unfortunately, since I'm talking at the moment, I can't see the chat. So Rana, would you mind telling me what some of the answers were for this?
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of the answers we're getting is true.
Yes, yeah. And so, I mean, it's a bit of a leading question. Some true or false questions are, but there's been some research, which I think is kind of interesting, that there was a control group that looked at ACEs, and for individuals that had 3 to 5 adverse childhood experiences or traumatic events, the average age was 79.1 years for the control group. But with individuals with ACEs, it was 78.5. So the answer is true. That adverse childhood experiences really can impact the longevity of an individual's life. So, one, we're looking at this psychologically, but also when we're looking at the whole child and their whole lifespan, just how significant these events are. The other thing I want to just talk briefly about is the 5 C's that Dr. McGrath talked about. I know we probably have a lot of different people here in the audience that are in schools or maybe in private practice, or maybe your students learning in this field to do that. And so I would just like to, you can either raise your virtual hand and Rana will call on you. You can also just speak freely, or you can put it in the chat box either way, and Rana will monitor that. What are your thoughts on this theory? And do you see it currently in the work that you're doing? Have you been able to see this? This is just an opportunity for you to see how this works in the real world. If you can think of any examples where you've seen this. So again, competence, confidence, connection, character, and caring. Anybody want to be brave enough to share how they see this in their environment? Maybe with children they've worked with. And that's okay if you don't. Rana, was there anybody that jumped in the chat to share anything?
No.
Okay, that's okay. We'll just go ahead and move along. And you can always add this in at the end of the presentation. If you want to think about this, we can circle back to that. And so we will also, at the end of the presentation, we'll put our emails in here. And so if you would like this PowerPoint, we can email it to you. And so I'm just going to move through what Dr. McGrath looked at, and we go into my part as well. So when we look at the application in the implementation of this, really looking at how positive psychology, strengths-based, resiliency-focused, all of that, how this can be implemented. Positive youth development programs are focused on underrepresented cultural groups. And you can imagine that even when we look at, say, for example, take this up to the college level, when we look at first-generation college students, some of the past research when we're looking at first-generation college students really was, well, how do we make these students successful because they have less resources out there? But the idea when you look at this from this positive approach, and when you look at this from this resiliency approach, it's not that these individuals are in deficit of something because they didn't have the resources that other individuals might have had. What we look at instead is, what are the strengths that they bring to the table? What is this resiliency that they have in them that allows them to rise above many, many other individuals to be successful? And so again, it's that positive focus. So I just want to encourage everybody, when you're working with youth, try to look at the resiliency and the strength that you see when working with youth, rather than seeing the deficit that's not there. So youth are engaged as stakeholders and partners in the project of improving their lives. And that also, when we look at counseling, in the field of counseling, even when we're looking at getting consent, informed consent, and we're looking at, we do that with the parents, but we also do that with the child as well, no matter what the age. We work in partnership with them. Programs focus on all aspects of development: social, emotional, cognitive, academic, and behavioral. I think a lot of times when we work in the school setting, there can be a really high focus on the academic and the behavioral, but sometimes we miss some of the other aspects. I think we also, as counselors, will focus on the emotional, and even other areas with teaching. We look at the cognition and cognitive side. I think many times that social aspect is overlooked, and I think it's important. My son, he's 17, so he's graduating high school this year. Actually, he just graduated, and his ceremony is on Saturday. And one thing that I've learned is that no matter how much I was trained as a counselor, and I've been a licensed counselor since 1999, nothing really prepared me for how technology changed the shape and the essence of youth and what their world is like. And especially watching that during the pandemic, I'm sure many of you can relate to this, just seeing how the impact of isolation impacted youth and their mental health. I think that the social aspect is just so significant there. And so we can talk about that more in a minute if you'd like. Also looking at potential areas for practical application, the adoption into special education, restorative justice programs, and school discipline policies. Systems of support, preparation and training in life skills, and the importance of stakeholder engagement can be applied throughout the lifespan. So looking at the next steps, and these are not questions you have to answer. These are just things that I would like to encourage you to think about. What supports for resilience exist in your work and your home environments? So just if you could reflect on that. If you'd like, you're welcome to put some ideas in the chat box just to have some engagement. We'd appreciate that. And then Rana, maybe you could share if anybody answers the questions as I ask them. So what supports for resilience exist in your work and home environments? What are the primary barriers to supporting a focus on resilience and positive youth development? Can you identify 2 ways in which you could share the concepts of positive youth development with friends, colleagues, and family members? And then think of 2 to 3 ways that you can increase the development of resilience in children and adolescents in your community. Any thoughts on these questions that anybody, I'm so sorry, there's a fly coming in the screen here. Any thoughts on these questions that you can see in your own work environment or your own life that you would like to share? And again, you can either speak openly, you can raise your virtual hand and Rana can call on you, or you can put something in the chat box as well. Oh, go ahead.
So Danielle Lesher said, I believe there is some research that points to students who are engaged in school campus activities. They do better academically.
Yeah, I remember that as well. I used to work as an intervention counselor, and I remember reading the research that shows that the more a student is engaged at the campus, that just the higher level of success that they'll have overall. And yeah, great job pointing that out. I appreciate that. Anybody else that would like to add either additional research that they know about, or anything that they've seen in their own work in their own environment that supports resilience? Okay. We'll go ahead.
Sean Davis said, concern for the entire person, mental, physical, etc. Balance is important. And Frida said, we encourage confidence.
Oh, good. Yeah, thank you. And it's good to see you here, Dr. Davis. He is one of our faculty in the VA psychology program. So thank you for attending as well.
Hi, my name is Ebony Erickson. I currently work as a lead clinician. I'm an LPC in New Jersey, and I work at a K-8 school, and I see a lot of, sometimes there's barriers to implementing positive interventions. You get a lot of the teachers, especially this time of the year, that they're just frustrated. So they're like, here, you take this kid. And are counting down the days till the summer. So that can sometimes be a barrier. And also with parents, getting parent engagement can also be a barrier as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think too, you make some really good points. I know that at my son's school, they actually don't have a school counselor. It's a really small, it's a very, very small private school. And so they just don't have the money for that. And so it's interesting because also I think some of the biases too that come in with mental health, to not have to say, gosh, we have to have this, we really need this, you know. So thank you for sharing that perspective. And I think you're right, at the end of the year, people are tired, and it's that wanting to hand off, you know. I agree with that. I saw something a long time ago, and it had to do with and I wish I could remember it exactly, but it had to do with some elementary teachers that they would focus specifically at the start of the year on the kids that would, maybe not the shining stars. They would specifically look at the kids that maybe were overlooked, and then they would intentionally really hone in and focus on building those students up, that kind of confidence that you spoke of as well. And you know, it's interesting to see how people rise to the expectations of whatever we put on them that are positive, and then whatever in turn what they see for themselves. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Rana is going to cover the next 3 slides. And so Rana, I'm going to hand it over to you, and feel free to take your time as you talk about the resources for professionals, and also really why certain ones stood out to you as you researched this and you pulled this for this presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Mays. So yeah, I definitely, there was a lot of resources to choose from, but I chose these 10 resources because they're really relevant and user-friendly. As a college student, I understand like the importance of easy navigation and accessibility. And then these websites are very intuitive and their content is very organized. So some of the organizations that we have, or the resources that we have, the first one is National Association of School Psychologists, which is NASP. And I think that's a very common one. Another one is American School Counselor Association, ASCA. And ASCA is a professional organization for school counselors, and their website offers resources on topics such as college and career readiness, mental health, and social and emotional development. Another valuable resource is Child Mind Institute, and their website provides information for child and adolescent mental health, and resources for parents, educators, and mental health professionals. Then we have the National Institute of Mental Health. Its acronyms are NIMH. And this is another government organization that focuses on mental health research and education. Their website features resources for professionals who work with children and adolescents with mental health conditions. Then we have the Society of Clinical and Child and Adolescent Psychology. This is a professional organization for clinical psychologists who specialize in working with children, and their website offers resources on topics such as evidence-based treatments and training opportunities for professionals who work with children. And then we have the Association for Play Therapy, APT. And then this is they have information on training, certifications, and research. And then we have the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration. This is another popular one. It's a government organization that provides information and resource on mental health and substance use. Then we have the American Psychological Association, APA. It's a professional organization for psychologists. Their website offers resources for professionals who work with children, including research, practicing guidelines, and continuing education opportunities. And then we have two more. We have the Anxiety and Depression Association, ADAA. And this is a nonprofit organization that provides information and resources on anxiety, depression, and other related disorders. Their website features resources for professionals who work with youth, including webinars, professional development opportunities. And lastly, we have the Center for Parent and Teen Communication. And this offers resources and information for parents, educators, and professionals who work with teens. They feature articles, videos, and podcasts, and other communications. So yeah, these are the 10 websites that I thought would be useful for professionals who work with the youth.
Thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next one.
So next we have our cross-disciplinary affiliations for professionals and students. Some of the associations that we have listed are American Counseling Association for Child and Adolescent Counseling, American Psychological Association for School Psychology, Society of Clinical Child and Adolescent Psychology, American School Counselor Association, International School Psychology Association, National Association of School Psychologists, and many other organizations.
Thank you for sharing that, Rana. At the bottom of this, we also didn't want to leave out our marriage and family therapists or our social workers. So we have there, just like APA and ACA, there's a professional organization for any licensure body. One thing I'd like to share just briefly is that Dr. McGrath is a great connection with the National Association of School Psychologists and also ISPA, the International School Psychology Association. She's actually working with some of our undergraduate students on having them write an article about the history of NASP inside an article for ISPA. And so we, if you're interested in being involved with that, volunteering with that, whether you're a student or whether you are a professional, I definitely want to encourage you to reach out to Dr. McGrath so that you can get connected to these organizations. So, and we'll go into the next one so Rana can share a little bit more.
Yeah, and then these are just some additional resources that you guys can check out. We have PUID Toolkit, CDC, CDC for Youth, and then the Colorado Trust After School and Global. The links are right there, so you guys can click them. I'll also add them to the chat. Yeah, and these are just some associations that we thought that you guys could either join for either professionals or college students that are interested in emerging in this field. And you can definitely do that by joining some of these associations.
Thank you, Rana. Thank you for doing that. And we will go ahead and put these in the chat by the end of the presentation. And then again, you can also email us if you'd like a copy of the entire presentation. So how we asked this question earlier, so it's kind of you already know the answer. But yes, adverse childhood experiences can shorten an individual's lifespan. If you could go ahead and put in the chat what you remember the 5 C's to be. Just a quick knowledge and understanding check here. Even if you can just remember one of them. And Ron, I'll be looking at the chat to see what those are. Looks like we have someone who's popped in there, Rana. What did one individual say?
So Ebony said compassion. Dr. Davis said competence, confidence, and character.
Yep. So we have the first individual said compassion, which is really similar to caring. So it was caring, but that's pretty close. And then you're right about competence, confidence, and character, Dr. Davis. And then the other one that's in there is connection. So the 5 are competence, confidence, connection, character, and caring. And those 2 extra ones were contribution and creativity that Dr. McGrath discussed. And then we talked about this briefly a little bit, but what opportunities exist in your local schools and communities to address youth mental health challenges? So this isn't so much looking at the theory of positive youth development. It's more, what are you seeing out there currently? This is a chance for you to share some resources with other colleagues, or maybe even reflect on your past experience of what you saw and what was available. And so anybody that could jump in and just share what they've seen in their local school or community to address youth mental health challenges. I know at my son's school, they don't have a school counselor, but they do bring in school counselors to do presentations. They also had a death of a teacher during COVID. And so they brought in different individuals to come and just be available, like crisis counselors to come in to be with those elementary students. I know that some schools have intervention counselors, prevention counselors, crisis counselors. What else are each of you seeing out there, even digitally, digital therapeutics or mental health apps in terms of addressing youth mental health challenges? I see it looks like somebody's answered in the chat box, Rana. Can you share what they said?
Yep, Dr. Davis said, I've seen an increased concern with schools connecting with parents. And Ebony said, I work for an agency that contracts with different schools and districts to provide individual and family therapy to select groups of students.
Okay. Yeah, so having that, it's the access there, it sounds like, Ebony, I think that's wonderful. I think that's wonderful. And then Dr. Davis, what did Dr. Davis say again?
He said, I've seen an increased concern with schools connecting with parents.
Sure. Yeah. Nope. Yeah. And one thing that we talked about, like just digital therapeutics, with everything changing so much from the last 10 years, one thing that I've seen is that communication that you're talking about, Dr. Davis, is through apps. So whether it be through an app like, GroupMe, where you have groups that are together, maybe it's like a team and the coach and the parents are all together, or maybe it's Slack, where parents are communicating through Slack. With schools, maybe it's WhatsApp, there's lots of different things out there. Are there is there any other technology that you've seen out there that's increased that communication level at all? And it's okay if you haven't. I'm just going to see if anybody has any other resources that we've talked about. Okay. These are the references that we pulled from. So, and again, I can send this PowerPoint presentation over to you. Any questions at all? Feel free to speak, raise your hand virtually, or write your question in the chat box. Either way. And it's okay if you don't have any questions either. We're going to, because I want each of you to get credit for this CEU, we're going to hang out here until 5 till the hour. So according to the program, you have to be here for at least 45 minutes. So I just want to make sure you get your CEUs in. And so we're going to take this minute. We're going to take this moment. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste some of those resources so you have those as well. So Rana, do you mind sharing what's interesting about this is that the person who picked this topic was actually Rana. We said, Rana, what would you like to study about, learn about? What would you like to present on and dive deeper in? And so as a student, she's actually the one that picked this topic. Rana, do you mind? I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but do you mind sharing why this was an interesting topic for you, a point of interest, a focus that you felt was necessary to dive into for mental health professionals?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mays. I think for me, I think it's very important, especially nowadays. I see a lot of children looking a little depressed and sad, and I think a lot of it has to do with them being on their phones, being on the internet. So I really wanted to dive deep and find ways that we can pay attention to the youth and try to get them, happier.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. I'm copying over the additional resources so you can learn more about positive youth development and some of the different things that are out there. So I have put those in the chat box for you. You're welcome to take those and use those. And then thank you, Dr. Davis, for appreciate that. And I'm going to go ahead and also put in my email in case you would like a copy of this presentation. So you're welcome to use it, copy it, all of it for any future presentations for yourself as well.
And I have a question for you since we have some time.
Sure.
As a former K-12 educator and K-12 administrator, and working in a role where I did provide social emotional support for students, but not a mental health provider. I know there's a lot of teachers out there and educators who want to do more for their students in providing this positive mental health support, but they struggle with they're not mental health providers. They don't have the education that a counselor does. So what advice could you give to counselors for when they're approaching that teacher and how to work with those educators who are struggling with I'm not a mental health provider and honestly, I don't want to mess up the kid,
Sure.
because I'm not a mental health provider. So what advice is there for building that relationship with the teacher to be able to support the educators who are with the kids every day? And supporting the teachers, what can be done with that relationship?
No, I think that's a great question. One, I think, pulling up that the theory of the positive youth development, and that you can see those 5 factors and even those 2 additional ones to show somebody that this research, that this has been done across the world in different countries, by people that were not necessarily mental health professionals, but it still had a positive impact on youth. Being able to show that these are things that we can do to focus on resilience, to focus on the whole child, and not just looking at, some of the pathological and the mental health side of it that we tend to naturally do as clinicians. So I think not only focusing, it's interesting. So not only focusing on the theory that would help children in terms of PYD, but even taking that approach to the teachers, letting them know that you have a lot of skills. I'm so sorry about the background noise with my dog barking. Just letting them know that you already have the skills available. You have the connection with them. You have the caring. You have a lot of these things that are already going on that promote resiliency in youth, and to be able to focus on what they're already contributing. So, and in terms of, messing up, I think that just always having a good referral in place. So knowing that, if you have a kid that comes to you who does, it starts getting out of your expertise and scope, looking at whether it's harm to self, harm to others, abuse, anything along those lines, that they have a referral system. They know if a kid does this, if a kid says this, I know that I'm going to fill in the blank, whether that be walk them down to the school counselor, refer them, inside the school system to a crisis counselor, looking at one of the agencies like Ebony talked about. I think you said in New Jersey, possibly. Maybe I may have gotten the wrong state there, Ebony. But looking at those resources sometimes that are tapping into the schools as well, and connecting that teacher to those resources as well, so they have that. Thank you for asking that. I appreciate that, Chris. I think that was a great question.
Thank you. I know that's a common thing with educators is they want to work with the counselors and they want to follow but a lot of times that relation, a lot of the counselors aren't in a school every day. And so there's that relationship. I feel like that's important.
Yeah. The other thing too is that I think remembering that teachers really are, they're the front line, they're right there. The counselors can't work with them unless the teachers have identified them, in some way to say like, hey, I'm concerned about Johnny, I'm concerned about Susie, whoever, that the teachers are the eyes and the ears to be able to capture anything that could be happening. And so I think just focusing on the relationship, building the relationship to be able to identify when they reach out. I know that for me, so I'll just end on this because we only have 1 minute left. Back when I went to school, I originally went to school to be an educator, but I went on to my master's in counseling. And so in that, I did a lot of volunteering and student teaching and things like that. And there was a time where I was volunteering with a youth program up in Nebraska. And it was a really small town. And this kid came up to me at the video store, which is back when we used to rent videos and everything. And she came up to me and she told me it was an outcry. I remember I was a college student. I didn't know what to do. I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do next? And I wasn't prepared. I wasn't ready. So I think just being able to have the resources available to refer to when needed, just having that there, knowing what's out there in your community can be great. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming to the presentation. We really appreciate it. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, but thank you. And we hope you have a great day.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. And thank you, audience, for being here. And everyone have a fantastic day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.